Hi, I'm MTG, and welcome to my channel where we're going to be doing another tech deck breakdown. And today we're going over a Warhammer commander that came in one of the precons that just recently dropped for Forces of Imperium. So this one totally went under the radar for me too, and I don't know if it's just because of the sheer level of spoilers that were happening at the time. But the commander we're going to be talking about today is Inquisitor Eisenhorn. And I think that this is going to be a really interesting spell slinger archetype that you could do for Dimir. And I know we just had a commander that dropped in the Dominaria set where maybe that's where you wanted to build something around for a Dimir spell slinger. This one is called Rona Shieldred's Faithful. And how her card works is whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, each opponent loses 1 life. So I think for me, that Inquisitor Eisenhorn is a bit more of, I would say, a better commander for that kind of archetype if that's what you're looking for, because one, I think that you're going to just get more value from this commander than you would from Shieldred's Faithful, but the other piece of this is you kind of have 2 different strategies that you can go with. One is, if you read this first ability, you may reveal the first card you draw each turn. As you draw it, whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card this way, create Cherubial, a legendary 4/4 black demon creature token with flying. And then you have, whenever Inquisitor Eisenhorn deals combat damage to a player, you can investigate that many times. And so why I felt like maybe it would be cool to do a spell slinger version for this commander is just because of the tokens that you can potentially make off of just revealing the card that you have in your hand. And I like that too because even though these are legendary tokens, you can still use them as sack fodder or just, have a solid 4/4 in the air that you can probably feel pretty confident swinging out with, even if it's going to die, just because you're probably going to be making a lot more of these if a good chunk of your cards in your library are going to be instant or sorcery spells. So looking at kind of what I think this commander wants, as at least what I saw when I first looked at it, was 1, that you want to do spell slinging, and 2, you want to make your commander unblockable. So why do you want to make your commander unblockable? Well, if you look at the second chunk of what this commander does, is whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you investigate that many times. So you have a huge potential just with combat damage alone to make a lot of artifact tokens here, which also leads to, some sort of artifact synergies that you can build around just with that. So I think that the 2 main things that you want to do is maybe drain with some sort of you sacrifice an artifact to, the clue tokens or whatever you're doing with them to essentially hit your opponents for damage. So there's a few cards that you can do with that. That's going to be Marionette Master. So that card, it is 6 CMC, but it's really powerful and it can help close out the game, especially if you have a lot of tokens. So whenever an artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette's power. So again, that's going to do a lot of damage to your opponents, and it would be a very solid way to close out the game. Another card that would be really good if you're trying to lean into just the artifact sacrifice strategy would be Disciple of the Vault. So whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may have target opponent lose 1 life. And then another one if you want kind of a backup commander effect, because I think you're going to want to create a lot of artifacts that you can sacrifice to kind of get those triggers, is going to be Eloise, hope I pronounced that right, Nephilia Sleuth. She came from the Innistrad set. I believe it was Crimson Vow. I could be wrong on that, but it was one of those 2. They're 5 CMC, and then whenever another creature you control dies, you investigate. And then if you sacrifice a token, you can surveil 1. So if you have some cool graveyard stuff going on there, that could be a pretty powerful card. And then another one I really wanted to call out is pretty much most of the Tezzeret Planeswalker cards are going to be really huge for any sort of artifact stuff that you're trying to run with, especially Tezzeret Master of the Bridge. So creature and Planeswalker spells you cast have affinity for artifacts, so that's just going to help you cast more spells. And if you +2, you can deal X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of artifacts you control, and you gain X life. So if you have something 5 tokens that are little artifact clues that your commander made, then the chances are you're going to be able to hit the table for quite a bit of damage. And then if you have, like veto out where you're gaining that life, maybe you can target an opponent for even more damage. So stuff like that I think is going to be really powerful. But I decided for what I was going to do, it might be a bit more of like a jinx strategy than, trying to lean into like what your commander's trying to do with building all those artifacts. But I think what was going to be at least fun for what I want to do with this commander was just focus on maybe like spell slinging effects. So I tried to put in some instant and sorcery spells that are pretty cheap, so I could trigger other things that might care about you casting spells. So I really love cards like Talrod Sky Summoner, and then this card that I've been wanting to put in a lot more decks, but I just couldn't justify it, is Sedgemoor Witch. I just love that card so much. And the other one too is Archmage of Emeritus. So Talrun and Sedgemoor are going to create a lot of tokens for you to help you either, go wide or give you stuff that you might want to sacrifice for other effects that you have on the board, like a Blood Artist out on the board. You have Sack Outlet, and you win maybe by draining people out because you made a lot of tokens from casting spells. And then Archmage is just really good because you're going to get a lot of card draw off them if you're a Spell Slinger deck, which is probably why you see them in a lot of Exit decks. But overall, I think like it's going to be like pretty fun to do a Dimir version of spell slinging, because when I think about doing anything that's a spell sling effect, I always think about Izzet, and Izzet has a lot of access to like making treasures and different kind of effects that I think in my mind are easier to build around, but Dimir has like a little bit of a different template for that. And I think because of that, it might lean more into card draw specific things and then removal and counter spells. So it might be like more controlling in a way that could feel, I don't know, maybe bullying at times. But for me, I could have been a little heavy on the removal that I did put in my deck list. But I did try to put in like counter spells and then things that would help destroy creatures or exile creatures, and just ways to keep myself protected if I'm not able to really build my board state decently. At least try to deter opponents from attacking me, because they're like, oh, if I swing at them, are they going to have removal against like my attacking creatures or something? So try to lean into that a little bit. And then the idea was, again, just trying to trigger abilities outside of just what my commander is doing. So if I could make that 4/4 flyer by, revealing like a brainstorm and then casting it and making tokens, I think that would just be a cool synergy to work with. I also try to put things in looking at the secondary ability that this commander has with just, hitting face and making tokens, is that I wanted to put stuff to make my commander unblockable. So I have an enchantment called Aqueous Form in my deck list. So you enchant the creature and they can't be blocked, and whenever they attack, you can scry 1. So that seems like a good way to get some value and, a little bit of top deck manipulation. And then Artful Dodge I think would be a fun spell because it has flashback, but it also makes a target creature unblockable, so you can make your commander unblockable. And another spell too that is from New Capenna, it's an enchantment, and as long as an enchanted creature is attacking alone, it can't be blocked. And then whenever it deals damage to a player, it connives. So that just helps the commander get even bigger. And then some other effects that I thought would be helpful for either with like implementing our backup strategy, or, doing spell slingy stuff, or just kind of having a backup commander effect, were Leered Disciple of the Drown. So spells can't be countered, which may seem bad if you're running counter spells, but I think this card is worth it to run just because of what it does here in the second part of the paragraph, which is each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. So with that, I think it's important to keep in mind that, if you're going to be casting spells, you might want to reuse them again. And Leer is really good at helping you get, additional value out of your instant and sorcery cards. And then the other card that I thought would serve really well as like a backup commander effect is God Eternal Kefnet. It's 4 CMC, flying, which always is a good thing to have. And when you reveal the first card, you draw each turn. As you draw it, whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card this way, you may cast the copy, and that copy costs 2 less to cast. And then if it dies, you can put it into, or is put in exile, you may put it into your library third from the top. So it makes it hard to kind of deal with it if it becomes a problem, because it just goes back into your library. I think those things would be fun if trying to lean into like a spell slinger archetype with like a backup strategy of letting your commander essentially be unblockable. And then some other alternate win cons that I have are things with drain effects. So I like Agent of the Iron Throne because if we are making, artifact tokens and sacrificing them, or even creatures, it's nice to be able to hit your opponents for a little bit more damage. I have Blood Artist, Grey Merchant, Sir Conrad, and Zulaport Cutthroat as essentially alternate ways that we can deal damage, and maybe after a while that adds up to being a win con. So that's kind of my idea for this deck. I'm really curious what your thoughts are, if you've even heard of this commander, or if you have a deck list for it, because this was definitely a card that flew under the radar for me, and I'm actually pretty excited to build this out in paper and see how it goes. So thank you so much for watching, and have a good one. Bye.